On a quiet Saturday morning in Plano, Texas, the sun shone brightly over the neatly manicured lawns, and the sound of children's laughter filled the air. James Parker, a seemingly ordinary resident, stepped out of his two-story brick home, trash bag in hand, ready to take it to the curb. Little did he know, this day would turn into a spectacle that would shake the very foundation of his community. As he walked towards the street, James noticed three figures standing at the edge of his driveway. Two men donned black tactical vests with community enforcement emblazoned across their chests, while the third, Sarah Whitfield, the president of the Homeowners Association, stood between them, her expression serious. James's instincts kicked in, something felt off. "Mr. Parker," Sarah began, her voice sharp and rehearsed, "we need to talk." James set the trash bag down, curiosity piqued. "About what?" One of the men, tall and imposing with a shaved head and mirrored sunglasses, stepped forward. "You're in violation of neighborhood regulations. We're here to detain you until the police arrive." James raised an eyebrow, amusement flickering in his eyes. "Detain me? For what exactly?" The second man, shorter and broad-shouldered, pulled out a crumpled piece of paper. "Property violations, non-compliance with HOA orders, unauthorized modifications to your driveway, the list goes on." James chuckled, shaking his head. "So you think you can just walk onto my property and detain me? You've got the wrong guy." The taller man's jaw tightened. "You can come peacefully, or we'll make it harder on you." The air thickened with tension as neighbors peeked through their curtains, phones in hand, ready to capture the unfolding drama. James took a step forward, his voice calm but firm. "Let me explain something to you. There's no such thing as community enforcement. You're trespassing." Sarah's cheeks flushed with anger. "You think you're above the rules because of who you are. We can't have someone undermining our community." James's eyes narrowed. He had dealt with far more dangerous individuals in his career as an FBI agent than these two imposters. Instead of revealing his identity, he simply smiled. "You've picked the wrong driveway today." Sarah stepped closer, her voice rising. "These men can hold you until the police arrive, and when they do, you'll be the one answering questions." James dropped the trash bag, the sound echoing down the street. It wasn't surrender, it was a declaration of war. The neighborhood was watching, and he wasn't about to back down. The taller man took a bold step forward, boots scraping against the concrete. "Sir, don't make this difficult. You're being non-compliant." James's smirk widened. "You're standing on my property with no badge and no legal authority. You've got 30 seconds to back off before you regret this." Sarah's frustration boiled over. "You've ignored warnings and fines. The HOA exists to keep this neighborhood safe." James's gaze remained steady. "Respect isn't forced with fake cops and threats. It's earned. And right now, what you're doing isn't about rules, it's about control." The bearded man shifted nervously, while the taller one remained rigid, hand hovering near his belt. James could sense their confidence wavering. "You want to know what real authority looks like? It's not two men playing soldier. It's training, law, accountability. And I promise you, the real cops will be very interested in this little performance." The tension escalated, and the crowd began to murmur, sensing the shift in power. James's voice dropped low, meant for the imposters but audible enough for the neighbors. "You want to know what happens when you impersonate an officer? It's prison time, not community service." The bearded man's resolve crumbled. "Maybe we should just go," he muttered, glancing at his partner, but the taller man, Eddie, wasn't ready to back down. "Last warning. You either come with us peacefully, or we'll use force." James leaned in slightly, his voice calm but cutting. "Son, I've dealt with cartel enforcers who are less reckless than you. Do yourself a favor and move back before this turns into something you can't walk away from." Doubt flickered across Eddie's face, but Sarah, desperate to maintain control, shouted, "Don't let him intimidate you." The crowd began to rally behind James, voices rising in agreement. "This isn't order, it's chaos," someone shouted. "You can't arrest your neighbor for cutting his grass too short." James seized the moment. "This is your last chance. Walk away now before the whole block watches you hauled off in handcuffs." Eddie hesitated, sweat beading on his forehead. The crowd was no longer passive, they were engaged, and the tide was turning against Sarah and her enforcers. "Listen to me carefully," James said, his voice steady. "You leave quietly and pray the police don't charge you with impersonation, or you keep pretending you have power, and this street watches you get dismantled in real time." The bearded man, Sean, finally spoke up, his patience gone. "I'm not going to jail for this." Eddie's bravado cracked. "Maybe he's right, Sarah. Maybe we should just go." Sarah's face twisted in anger. "You think this is about your reputation? I'm not going to let him win." James's gaze remained fixed on Eddie. "You lay one finger on me, and I promise you, the real police won't even have to ask me who you are. They'll already know." The crowd erupted in approval, and the pressure mounted. Eddie's shoulders sagged, his grip on the cuffs loosening. James straightened, his voice rising. "This is the end of your game. You don't have authority. You don't have power." Sarah's desperation boiled over. "You don't belong here. You never have." James's expression softened, but his tone was firm. "You just told everyone exactly who you are." As the standoff reached its climax, the sound of sirens echoed in the distance. The real police were on their way, and the truth was about to be revealed. When the officers arrived, James stood tall, his demeanor calm and collected. "Officers, I'm Special Agent James Parker, FBI. This man attempted to impersonate law enforcement and assaulted me on my property." The officers exchanged glances, assessing the situation. "We'll take it from here," one officer said, stepping forward. As Eddie was led away in handcuffs, Sarah's facade crumbled. "You can't do this. I'm the HOA president," she shouted, but her words fell on deaf ears. James turned to the crowd, his voice steady. "This isn't about lawn height or driveways. It's about people pretending to have authority they don't." The neighborhood buzzed with energy, the tension dissipating as the truth emerged. Sarah's reign of intimidation was over, and the community began to heal. In the days that followed, the story spread like wildfire. Videos circulated online, and James became a symbol of standing up against false authority. The neighborhood transformed, conversations sparked about leadership, accountability, and the importance of community. As James stood on his porch one evening, he reflected on the events that had unfolded. The truth always comes to light, he thought, and sometimes the battles that matter most are fought right at home. The neighborhood had learned a valuable lesson. Real power comes not from titles or intimidation, but from honesty, accountability, and the courage to stand firm when it matters most. And as the sun set over Plano, James knew that the fight for justice had only just begun. The following Saturday morning arrived, 1 week after the confrontation that shook the neighborhood. The air was calmer, the lawns freshly cut, and children raced their bikes without parents peering nervously through blinds. Yet the echoes of that day still lingered, and every time someone passed James's driveway, they glanced at it like it was a landmark, the place where truth stood taller than intimidation. James kept his routine simple. He walked out with his morning coffee, leaned against the railing of his porch, and watched the block stir awake. He hadn't sought out attention, but the neighborhood gave it to him anyway. A neighbor waved as she loaded groceries into her car, and a man mowing his lawn raised a hand in thanks. Even people who had never spoken to him before now offered nods of acknowledgement. What sat on his mind wasn't pride, it was the lesson he wanted his community to carry forward. That afternoon, the HOA board called a special neighborhood gathering in the community park. Word spread quickly, and nearly every household sent someone. Families sat on folding chairs, children ran in the grass, and a sense of anticipation filled the air. When James arrived, conversations hushed. He wasn't there as an official speaker, just as a neighbor, but the board chair, a quiet man named Harold Jennings, who had just been voted interim president, asked him to address the group. James hesitated at first, then stepped forward. He didn't raise his voice much, but the crowd leaned in, hanging on his words. Last week, we all saw what happens when authority is faked, when power is used to intimidate instead of protect. And the truth is, it could have gone very differently. Someone could have been hurt. Kids were watching. Lives could have been ruined far worse than they already were. He paused, scanning the faces, some solemn, some curious, some ashamed. What I want you to take away from that moment isn't about me. It isn't about the FBI. It's about the kind of neighborhood we want to live in. Do we want fear to govern our streets, or do we want respect and accountability? Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. James continued, leadership isn't about control, it's about service. And service means putting people first, even when it's inconvenient, even when you don't get credit. That's the difference between authority and arrogance. A hand shot up from the back. It was Mrs. Henderson, her voice strong despite her age. Mr. Parker, what should we do the next time someone tries something like this? James didn't hesitate. Stand together. Speak up. Don't let fear isolate you. The reason those imposters had any chance at all was because they thought the neighborhood would stay silent. Silence is what bullies feed on. But when you speak truth, when you shine light on lies, the game ends. The crowd clapped softly, then louder as the message settled in. Parents nodded, whispering to their kids. The teenagers, including Marcus, filmed from the back, capturing every word for a new live stream. As the gathering ended, people lingered, talking with one another more than they had in years. Strangers introduced themselves, shaking hands, asking about families. The tension that once defined their street seemed to dissolve into something else, connection. Later that evening, James returned home. The sun was setting, casting a golden light across the quiet block. He stood for a moment at the end of his driveway, the same spot where everything had gone down just days earlier. The memory of Eddie's cuffs, Sarah's shouts, and the flashing red and blue lights was still vivid, but now that space symbolized something else. A turning point that he thought back to his years in the bureau, the endless briefings about criminal networks, the dangerous missions, the times he had stared into the eyes of men who lived on fear and power. It struck him that sometimes the battles that mattered most weren't fought in foreign cities or dark alleys. They were fought right at home, on the streets where children played and families built their lives. He whispered quietly to himself, almost as a prayer, the truth always comes to light. The sound of children laughing down the block pulled him back. He smiled faintly, picked up the empty trash can by the curb, and walked it back to his garage because life was moving forward. And that was the point. For those who had watched the standoff unfold, the moral was clear. Real power comes not from titles, intimidation, or fear, but from honesty, accountability, and the courage to stand firm when it matters most. If you're watching this story right now, ask yourself, in your own community, in your own life, are you building with fear or with respect? Are you staying silent, or are you speaking truth when it's hardest? That's the choice each of us faces, whether we wear a badge or not. So if this story resonated with you, if it made you think about leadership, community, and the meaning of true authority, make sure to subscribe. Because stories like this remind us all that sometimes the fight for justice happens right where we live.